Hi, Tom. Good to see you.
Hello, Eric. Yeah, good to see you again. Been around a long time. I haven't seen you for a while, though.
It's been a while, yeah. My question is, I've been thinking about your experience in the non-physical. There are many people, I guess, doing the same type of work that you do in the sense of helping humanity forward, shifting the paradigm towards idealism, and spiritual teachers who all seem like low entropy beings with good intentions. And some of whom you've talked to, like Rupert Spira and Donald Hoffman and Ian McGilchrist and some others. And what I found interesting is that is the vast difference there seems to be in terms of your experiences in the non-physical, like your experience base and their experience base. Like I remember Donald Hoffman saying that he meditates 4 hours per day. And he's been doing that for many, many years. And then there's Rupert Spira, who's a spiritual teacher, and he teaches meditation. And there's many other spiritual teachers like them. And when you ask them, they don't seem to have hardly any experience in terms of out of body or the paranormal. They both admitted that themselves. And then on the other hand, there's you, who seems to have almost spent more time in the non-physical in your life compared to in the physical, you know? And I think the stories that you do share don't even begin to scratch the surface of what you've actually experienced out there. So that makes me wonder, why is there such a big difference between those people?
I think the biggest difference is that I approached my experiences as a scientist. Okay, I'm very, very left-brained physicist, and I'm a very, very right-brained experiencer and connected to the intuitive side as well. So as I had my experiences, the science part of me, the logical part of me, wanted to understand, how did they work? Why did they work that way? What else could you do? What was the structure underlying these experiences I'm having? What was the point? Why did I have this experience and not some other experience? Why that particular experience? It seemed like to me that the system that I was experiencing in was not at all random. There was purpose behind it. There was, you know, reason behind it. If it's all random, then nothing really means anything. It's doesn't have any coherence. It doesn't have any meaning, larger meaning. It just is whatever it is at that moment. And it wasn't like that. There was a coherence to it. There was meaning to it. So that told me it was a logical system. It had structure. It had rules. It had things to be understood. So I wanted to understand it. So I worked at it from that viewpoint, which then took me to understanding the nature of these things. Most of the people that you mentioned, they found through their experience a process and a way of being that worked really well for them. So they found out that if they were caring, if they did love, if it was more about others, that life was better. But they found that out just by experiencing it. Oh, when I'm polite and nice and helpful, I feel better and other people feel better, and it's a win-win for all of us. So let's be more that way. And they developed their programs, their books, the things that they did around this practical information of idealism. There's something bigger out there than just the physical world. That's idealism. So they took well, what is that bigger thing out there? And how are we supposed to connect to it? And they had some things like that, but they didn't really look for what was the structure. Why was it there? Where did it come from? They didn't get at it that way. I did. I'm a physicist. I want to understand how it works, where it came from, and why does it work that way. So I kept pushing on it, And one of the ways to push on consciousness to try to figure out how it works is to explore the paranormal. I mean, that's consciousness. And it's a whole bunch of stuff that seems to be very structured. You learn these kinds of rules and get into this kind of mind space, and you can remote view, or you can go out of body, or you can use your mind to heal. Why? How? What's the mechanism behind that? How is it that I can use my mind and somebody heals? What's the mechanism behind the placebo effect? Why is it that you tell somebody this is a wonderful pill that will make you well, and it makes people well, even if it's just sugar or sawdust? How does that work? So I went after the process behind it all. What was the significance, not just what processes work? You know, what works here in the physical? How should you behave? How should you structure your life? How should you see other people? How should you approach relationships to optimize them and make them, you know, as good as possible? Well, you have a lot of people who have experience that have come to conclusions about how to make a relationship better, how to feel better, how to find happiness, how to find peace. And they've done that basically on their own experience. They have found peace. Many of these people have come from the dark night of the soul, where they were at the very end of their rope, and then realized suddenly, when there was no place else to go, that they were the problem, that it was their own beliefs and understanding and fear that was creating the problem for them. And then they started to grow up, and 5 years later, they're a spiritual leader, with books and a following. That's almost a typical path one takes. You get to the dark night of the soul first, and then you turn around. Some people don't turn around. Some people stay there, and they're miserable all their lives. Some people commit suicide when they get to that point. But some people realize that they have been the problem all along, their perspective, their attitude. And then they start growing. And like I say, 5 or 6 years later, they're teachers because they've been through it. They're teaching out of their experience. So, well, I've done all those paranormal things, not because I was so enamored with the paranormal. The paranormal is not a big deal at all. But it was to help me understand how consciousness worked. What was the mechanisms? These are things that consciousness can do. So how does it do them? And why? And what makes that work? How can you heal somebody? What's the mechanism that actually does the healing? So anyway, that's kind of the primary difference than them. But they end up with a philosophy, a way of living that is more profitable, a way of thinking about things that's more profitable. I ended up with the theory of everything, how things work. Why is that more profitable? Why is low entropy and being kind, and why is love a more profitable way? Well, you can get to that with a left brain logical process, understanding that that's how a system, consciousness, lowers its entropy, which is what drives its evolution. Now, that's all logical process, but it then explains a whole lot of other things as well. All the paradoxes in science. You see, these others understand how to get along and work inside this virtual reality. But they don't understand how, that this is a virtual reality, or they don't understand what's outside of it or why it's like that. They just know that from their experience, being kind and helpful and loving is the optimal way to progress through life. That's the big difference between us. And that's why I went to the paranormal things just as tools to learn how consciousness worked, because I was trying to figure out the whole ball of wax of why it worked that way, not just optimize a way to live in this virtual reality.
The thing that's hard for me to grasp is that how is it possible for someone to meditate for, say, 20 years, 4 hours per day, and not run into any of this sort of phenomenon like out of body? Like that's hard for me to wrap my mind around. But I guess maybe what you're saying here is that it requires a really specific intent to have those exact experiences in order to run into them in the first place, and you had that because you met Bob Monroe, and the purpose was to learn this out of body thing, whereas maybe someone like Donald Hoffman is just meditating for a completely different reason with a different intent. Would that be the...
Yeah, that's part of it, but part of it is also just the possibilities. You see, our culture kind of constrains, we talk about the constraints of your culture. Our culture constrains people thinking. And physicalism or materialism is a part of our culture. You don't get taught to be a materialist in school. You just get that out of your culture. This physical world is our world. That's it. All right, there's religion that says, well, there's another dimension, but that's a belief. That's not a fact. So if you're a fact kind of person, if you're a logical kind of person, then that religion doesn't work so well for you because you don't want to go to belief space. Or you go to belief space and then you have your logical space, and they're two separate things. You keep them in your life as, well, I got this and I got that, and they don't mix. So I do this in that space and I do that in that space, but I don't, I don't try to bring them together. I just live in the two. So I think many times it's just not a possibility in their reality. I have people that read my books, and at the end of reading my books, they said, oh, when I finished your books, I had all kinds of paranormal experiences. I went out of body and this happened and that happened. And, and my books don't make people do paranormal things, but what my books do is open up people's minds to the possibilities. Once they realize that all this stuff is possible, now they're open to it. So as things happen, they go, oh, that's what that is, rather than, oh, that was just an anomaly, something I did and made it up. I must have eaten something that didn't agree with me. They make up all kinds of reasons to maintain their cultural beliefs. And our cultural beliefs don't include the paranormal. Now, you look at the indigenous people of Australia and the indigenous people of America, and you go to old cultures, and paranormal and spiritual stuff are part of their culture. It's not that those are outside their culture. So those people experience those kinds of things every day. They live in that space. But in our space, in what I call Western culture, which is now kind of spread all over the world, the culture of consumerism and production and gadgets, that space, the paranormal is woo-woo, doesn't exist. And anybody that thinks that it's not woo-woo, well, they're having a problem. They're fooling themselves. They're having delusions. So it's a kind of thing that if you do have one of those, you're not going to admit it. You're going to say, oh, no, I just had a terrible relapse into psychosis, and gee, I'm glad I'm better now. So one is just the possibility that it exists, that it's a natural part of consciousness, and that every conscious being, including your dogs and cats and horses and pigs, all of these have connection to consciousness. They don't just live in a physical world. And that's obvious to us, but we see it and then we dismiss it and just don't understand it. Like we're sitting in our chair and we think a thought that says, oh, I think I'm going to get up and take the dog, and we're going to take a walk down to the river and back. That would be nice. I feel like that. And before you even move a muscle, the dog starts running around in circles in front of your chair, excited. Well, how does the dog know that? Well, dogs don't have a large intellectual capacity, so they make up for that by a much larger intuitive capacity. They connect with us mind to mind all the time. They know how we feel, they know what we're thinking, what we're planning to do, and they can pick up on that because they're not dedicated to a logical process, because that's not what they do. They live in a world of feeling and intuition. That's what they do. So they're good at that. They're much better at it than we are. So our dogs and cats are more evolved on the intuitive side than we are for the most part. Anyway, so I think that's a big part of it. It's just our culture doesn't support it. Actually, our culture is negative toward it. People don't see it as a possibility, and when it happens, they discount it, throw it out as an anomaly that doesn't make sense, and they don't talk about it. because that would make them less in the public's eye. That would make them, they can't go to their boss. Hey, boss, I had a dream last night, and here's what we should do with the business. You know, the boss will think you're a fool. You know, you don't get business ideas in dreams. So they keep it to themselves. They don't talk about it, and then it kind of dies on the vine because they've rejected it. So I think that's the thing that's different. And why did I not follow that route? Well, I've never fallen that route. I've always been one to see the rules as obstacles rather than things to live by. I've always just kind of had that personality that doesn't believe anything until I've experienced it. I don't accept rules just because that's what the culture says. I don't accept anything until I have it in my own experience. And if it's not my experience, it's not my truth. And I don't believe anything that's not my own personal truth. You have to do that. Okay, that limits you because your personal truth can only go so far as your personal experience, but that's as much as you can do. Outside of that, you either believe it or disbelieve it, and neither one's functional. So it's just the way I've always been. I was born that way. And when I got to the studying consciousness, well, the paranormal was a good place to start because that's the mechanistic thing that you do this and that happens. And I needed to find out, well, what was doing this? How did that make anything happen? You know, how does that work? So I think that's the difference between me and most the other philosophers and idealists who are out there talking about something bigger than the physical world. I went after the understanding and the big picture, and they went after to how do you optimize your behavior and your results of that behavior. So I looked for the bigger picture. They looked for the part that was immediate to them in their interactions with other people. They're kind of the obvious picture that's in front of you. And many of them are very good. You know, they do understand it. These are not false prophets. These are people who are very, you know, they understand deeply love and caring and how that plays out in the world. So it's good that they do that, but they just don't have the bigger picture of why is that true? You know, why does that work that way? And what's the larger structure? How does the placebo effect work? Why does it work that way? That's just a mystery that it's not in their game to solve.
Right. Okay, thank you, Tom. That clears things up.
Would you like to see a better world? Get a better perspective. Balance your intellect with intuition and explore your true nature with the Exploring Consciousness and Everything Paranormal program with Thomas Campbell. In this program, you will have the benefit of Tom's vast experience and learn to access point consciousness, communicate with the larger consciousness system, remote view, use your natural ability to heal with intent, and explore reality in the out-of-body state. His famous binaural beats are included. Details are in the description below. Thank you.